All right, well, so excited to have you here, Julia, to visit the department today, at least virtually. Although, even if we were in person, probably you'd be, uh, Skyping in from some far off land, distant land, some amazing adventure. So Julia is actually a recent graduate of SVA from the MFA department, an extraordinary designer. Um, but I think a particular inspiration to you, particularly the second years, will be the fact that Julia is the rare master's student who actually turned her thesis exploration into the next phase of her design life. And maybe she'll talk a little bit about that in her slides, or you might ask her about it in the Q&A. Anyway, super thrilled to have you here, Julia. It's great to see you again, and can't wait to hear about the past year and I guess some adventures of your next year ahead. So welcome, Julia Marsh.
Thanks, Alan. Yay. Really happy to be here. I loved taking classes with Alan. He was an awesome mentor during my thesis, as you all know. So I'm gonna talk a little bit about my background, where I come from. I'm gonna touch on my thesis, how it evolved into an actual business, and then all the adventures and misadventures along the way, and hopefully something's useful to you. But I empathize very greatly with where you're at currently in the course of things. So please feel welcome to interrupt or ask questions at any time if something's interesting to you. All right, here we go. Today we're talking about, is this showing up okay? Cool.
Yep.
Today we're talking about benevolent materials and the power of seaweed. So I'll just start off with a little bit of background and context. I grew up in Carmel, California, where the forest meets the sea, as I always say. I think it's a romantic way of framing it, but it really was a pretty romantic childhood. I was very lucky. I grew up playing with long strands of kelp with my sister, and going hiking in the woods and exploring tide pools, or I'd be up in the mountains climbing trees and that kind of thing. I really love nature. I love to explore. I love long treks and backpacking and travel. But of course, I'm also a designer by trade. I've spent over a decade building brands, including giant tech companies in San Francisco. That could include anything from launching wall-to-wall screen displays or UX schemes or marketing campaigns. That's my good friend Ashton Kutcher at an event that I designed. And then I also spent years designing packaging and product systems for CPGs, I think most notably including Brandless. Pedro actually went to this event, so remember that day? It was a good day. There was a ton of joy and a lot of good intent in building Brandless. They were on this mission to make conscious consumption more accessible. So all of their products were $3, and they had all these great, properties. They were non-GMO, no artificial flavors, no artificial coloring, cruelty-free. I loved all those attributes, and I was happy to be a part of that company. But I felt like there were some inconsistencies between the mission and the brand, being that all the content was coming in plastic packaging. And I was constantly confronted with this as a designer, that my identity as a designer was totally operating in contrast to my identity as an environmentalist, constantly being reliant on plastics and not having any good alternatives. So when I showed up at SVA MFA design, I started exploring some alternatives, as I think we probably all have. Looked at SCOBY, what a delight. Looked at mushrooms, joyful, love it, like so much potential. And then also stumbled across algae, and that actually happened in Alan's class. And once you find seaweed, there's no going back. I was like, whoa, whoa, whoa. I grew up with this stuff. I know seaweed. I played with it as a kid. I love it. I know where it comes from. And it has this awesome potential. There I am in a tide pool playing with seaweed, being fascinated by it. Being intrigued by where it came from. And it was just a super organic realization that I should pursue this. And if you've looked at any of my work so far, you know why I love seaweed. I'm why I'm head over heels in love with it. You know, it's a regenerative, benevolent, giving material that replenishes and restores ecosystems. And it can be used for all sorts of beautiful things. I actually traveled to Indonesia so that I could visit seaweed farms. And I learned, you know, how the material is grown. I learned that it's this incredible source of income for coastal communities, that, you know, it's climate resilient, that you don't need fertilizer or fresh water or arable land or pesticides or anything to grow seaweed. And it's not just a super crop, it's actually super useful. It can be, of course, used in food, but there are really innovative products coming out, ranging from pasta to kelp burgers. It's been used historically and in a contemporary context as a roofing material. Of course, there's algae net, turning it into these renewable fibers. We love the work of the Department of Seaweed over in England, making these structures out of seaweed. It can be turned into paper. It can be used as a, you know, a cattle feed to reduce methane emissions. And then, of course, it can also be used as a bioplastic. So I just totally fell in love with the versatility of this material. And these really special species that can be used to replace plastics were the basis for my graduate thesis. So this footage will look familiar to Pedro and Alan, but this was my thesis video where I talked about how seaweed was this beautiful, generous, giving source material that could be turned into a renewable, compostable replacement for plastics. And I worked alongside my friend who is a material engineer, gave him some seaweed, said, I kind of know how this works. Can you make something with it? And this was the finished product and the closest that I got to sort of actualizing my dream of making a new material during my thesis. And it was so successful that my mentor and professor, Brian Collins, invited me to go and speak at the Aspen Ideas Festival the summer following graduation. And that was a total game changer, because suddenly my thesis was being put in front of a much larger audience, including some really, you know, important figures in the CPG world, folks from Nestle and Coca-Cola and Crate and Barrel were there, and as well as a number of climate tech investors. And the questions that they asked and the feedback that and the discussions that we got into after the presentation made me realize that it wasn't just my passion that was carrying this project, it actually needed to exist into the world. And I almost felt like I would disappoint people if I didn't really take this seriously and pursue it. So I returned home after graduation, moved back to California from New York, and spent some time at home. That's my hometown, Carmel. You can kind of see it in the background. And I realized that, you know, there are over 10,000 species of seaweed, and a good chunk of those grow up and down the Pacific coast of North and South America. So, you know, I think the best way to really familiarize myself with the seaweed industry is to visit every possible seaweed farm along the entire western coast of North and South America. So that's what I decided to do with my partner, Matt. We built out this overland rig so that we could drive to the southernmost tip of Chile. This was in October of 2019, for context. Just a little bit about the rig, because I love to talk about it. We wanted to build an overlanding vehicle that would allow us to go where others couldn't, would allow us to be entirely self-sufficient, so that we could pull up to a location like this and, you know, park the rig right with a view of this incredible Peruvian lake. You can see that that's me right there. I loved this spot. It was so nice. It was very chilly. We were up at 14,000 feet. But it allowed us to be really self-sufficient. We had a rooftop tent. We built a kitchen in the back, but we were still discreet because this model is quite popular in South America. And the goal was to visit as many seaweed farms as we could. So we started in Baja. This is an on-land farm, which is not the kind of farm that Sway works with, but it's really important to understand the landscape. We learned that which seaweeds were most resilient, which were most productive, which were most useful. There's Matt, my partner, learning how seaweeds cultivated on land. They have to keep it constantly bubbling and sort of agitated so that the seaweed is inspired to continue growing year round. We met with some really remarkable seaweed farmers. This is Carlos. He was a total hoot, extremely well versed in English because he spent years traveling across the Atlantic on ships. And we learned from him that seaweed farming is a really resilient work opportunity for coastal communities that have been affected by overfishing, and that he had in his employ, over 25 folks who had previously been working on fishing boats that were no longer in service, and he was able to provide families with a steady source of income. And I was really inspired by that. We also visited the Caribbean coasts of Mexico, Belize, Costa Rica, and Colombia to get a broader understanding of some of the negative associations with seaweed. I'm not sure who's familiar, but sargassum is sort of plaguing the Caribbean coast due to, off-run from agricultural streams. Seaweed loves to eat pollutants, which we love about it, but it also sort of blankets these beaches and creates sort of toxic fumes and makes it impossible to enjoy the ocean. So there are all these really interesting organizations working with sargassum to turn it into a usable material, whether that's biofuel or building material, or even refining it down and turning it into bioplastics. So that was amazing. And then of course, along the way we had to enjoy the beauty and the nature that we were seeing. We were overwhelmed by the remarkable history and architecture and natural wonders that Central and South America have to offer. That's Acatenango in Guatemala, one of my favorite places in the whole wide world. But, as we took the time to explore as much nature and culture as possible, I think almost in equal measure, we were sort of staggered by the inequities facing rural areas when it came to plastic waste and waste management. As much as we would see these sort of beautiful jaw-dropping scenes, we would also see this kind of situation where these really popular lightweight plastics that are just as popular in the United States were used as tools for hygiene, and that makes sense. But because waste management is oftentimes limited or it's inaccessible in rural communities, these plastics would end up being burnt, and thus, these communities are inhaling toxic fumes, or they're discarded in piles like the one that you see on the right. That was a pretty common scene, kind of like heartbreaking. And then this kind of scene was very common as well. I filmed this in Peru as we were driving along the coastline. A lot of communities just don't have access to landfills, or landfills like this one are open air, and the lightweight debris will float out of those areas and into nature or onto the streets. And so naturally, there's been a lot of innovation in Central and South America around how we can replace plastics. So just as much as we were pursuing visits to all these seaweed farms, we also had the opportunity to visit with biomaterial innovators, really inspiring folks who are using the natural materials around them to eliminate fossil fuels from their various value chains. And so some fun examples were in Nicaragua. We visited this house on the island Ometepe, where they were collecting all of the waste that was blowing across the lake and on their island and filling it into these eco bricks and building schools with them. We visited this company called Deserto in Guadalajara, where they were turning cactus, the Nepal cactus, into leather, doing quite well. It was really impressive to see that they came up with this idea just 2 years ago, and we were able to scale it rather quickly. While we were in Colombia, we were stumbling through this amazing market and came across these loofah sponges, which I was so inspired by because I'd seen these in natural food stores before sliced up, but I'd never seen the full plant. And it's just a cucumber that has its skin peeled off, and people use it as sponges. Agave fibers, of course, thrilled to see this woven into blankets and hats, and you can kind of see them in the background there. And then one of my favorite projects was in Peru. We learned all about the regenerative nature of banana trees, how there's always a mother and a daughter. I'm not going to lecture about it, but you should look up the relationship between like intergenerational banana trees. And they were using the waste material from the banana stem and turning it into these compostable replacements for styrofoam plates, shown on the right there. Very, very cool to interaction there. And that was in Peru right before COVID hit. And that was the last innovation, that we got to meet with before our constitutional rights were suspended and the entire country went into lockdown. Fortunately, we were camping in the backyard of this Argentinian baker that we'd befriended right outside of Lima. Great bread. He had 2 little boys who we got to play with every day. We were there for about a month before we were finally politically evacuated and returned to California. Ooh, on a plane. It's loud. I'm just going to say it and then I'll play the video. We were politically evacuated on a flight alongside 200 Mormon missionaries, which was another delightful story, but this is a scene from the military hangar. So that all happened. We returned to California. It's almost exactly a year ago that we came back to the States, and we sort of hit the ground running. We were so supercharged by all that we had learned and encountered. And we were Matt and I were inspired to really bring Sway to life as quickly as we could. So sort of centered around this idea of what if plastic packaging, this material that only causes harm and damage at every step of the supply chain, could turn into a material with the capacity to replenish and restore life, as we had seen throughout Central and South America with those new innovative materials. What if we could usher in this new wave of benevolent materials, and how can we scale them to really redefine how we consume everyday items? So that is how we arrived at this idea of climate positive packaging, because as we know, plastics, fossil fuels, it's a climate issue, and Seaweed is able to deliver that. So I'll show you, this was where we left off in my graduate thesis, that material that I made with my friend. And this is where we are today. This is the current product that we've developed at Sway. It is 100% bio-based. It is 75% seaweed, 25% plants. It's 100% compostable. It degrades quite rapidly within 4 to 6 weeks in a waste environment. And the reason that we sort of landed on this thin film application was partially from what we saw in Latin America, but also because in conversations with major retailers, CPGs, compost organizations, packaging organizations, we learned that we really have to hit 4 markers in order to succeed in the market. So our packaging made from seaweed, it has to be non-toxic and compostable in order to be differentiated in the market and actually be worth making the switch from traditional plastics. It has to be affordable, of course. So this is sort of a core part of our mission at Sway, is to make this a conscious consumption accessible to as many people as possible. Fortunately, seaweed is really abundant, as we just saw, so it's not as expensive as it could be. We wanted to make a material that was carbon negative. So seaweed inherently regenerates natural systems and can sequester up to 20 times more carbon than trees. But how can we make the entire value chain carbon negative and minimize the energy inputs needed to actually make this material? And then how can we produce something that's extremely high performance, a one-to-one replacement for flexible LDPE that can fit right into existing manufacturing streams? I sort of listed some of the performance features that we've developed already, but some other exciting ones are that it's transparent. What we've learned from a number of major cosmetic and apparel brands is that the material needs to be transparent because otherwise it's seen as a hindrance to purchase. So this is a feature that not a lot of compostable alternatives can meet, which we're able to with our seaweed. In fact, I've gotten some feedback that it looks a little too much like plastic, and we might want to like keep more of the seaweed texture in it. So that's perhaps a path that we'll pursue in the future. The other exciting feature that we found is that it's heat sealable, allowing for a reseal and reusable component. And it's also printable, which of course, benefits brands who want to really rally around this material and use it as a campaign tool. I'll go through some of how we've built out the company since turning this into an actual business. We have a proprietary network of regenerative ocean farms. Although we didn't finish our trip all the way down to the southernmost tip of Chile, the bulk of the seaweed farmers that we work with now are based there. And we will eventually finish the trip, make it all the way down. The rig is still stored in Lima, so one day we'll make it. But we've made some remarkable friends in the seaweed world that allow us to source a really sustainable, high quality product. And then we're working with a network of converters who actually, like plastic packaging converters, who are already plugged into the brands that we would like to work with. So we're hoping to provide sort of a low lift transition into using our substrate that way. And then finally, we have some really stellar consumer brands lined up, some partnerships that I'm really excited to share in the future. But some that I can share are that you may have seen, we just won the Beyond the Bag Challenge. It was a huge win for us. The headlines that came out just a couple of weeks ago are that CVS, Walmart, and Target chose Sway as one of the best possible replacements for plastic currently available on the market. This was a really inspiring challenge to be a part of because they weren't looking at the problem from one angle. There was a subset of reusable solutions, a subset of technological solutions, and a subset of innovative materials. And we were one of 3 innovative materials chosen. And we believe that the reason that they were so excited about seaweed was mostly the carbon negative aspect, but also this idea of restoring and replenishing systems. So this was sort of the confidence boost we needed to believe that this material can succeed in a mainstream commercial space. You may see seaweed-based bioplastic bags in a Target. I'm not going to count my eggs before they've hatched, but you could see them as soon as Q3 of this year. And that's because part of winning the Beyond the Bag Challenge means that we get to work alongside closed loop partners in this consortium of retailers to actually pilot our material in store. So hope that works out. Just to give you a sense of the applications that we're looking at, of course, starting with that Q3 pilot, looking at retail bags, because there's a pretty, simple single substrate layer that doesn't require as many performance characteristics as some of the other packaging applications we're looking at. We're also looking at poly bags and hoping to pilot that material at the end of the year alongside some really, really cool apparel and cosmetic brands. And then afterwards, in the coming years, we'll start looking at other applications, poly mailers, specifically the kind that a clothing store would use to send an e-commerce item rather than a box. We'll look at pouches. This is a more complicated material, possibly also bubble wrap. And then the holy grail. And the reason that I originally started this project will focus on food packaging with really high moisture and oil barrier needed. And then finally, I'm happy to share some of my team with you all. You met him already earlier in the conversation, but that's my co-founder, Matt. He has a background developing corporate sustainability strategies. So his skill set really complements mine and provides a lot of balance to my design background. We're also joined by 2 PhD Berkeley material engineers, as well as Cliff Barr's former packaging sourcing coordinator. And she actually joined our team because she was so frustrated that Cliff Bar wasn't able to find a proper replacement for their bar wrappers. And so to kind of wrap things up, I just wanted to ask this question, which is, what happens if we succeed? What happens when we adopt benevolent materials? I think the first one is the most obvious, which is that we have the potential to eliminate plastic waste and eliminate a lot of the residual problems associated with them, both human and ecological. But then we also have this opportunity to regenerate ecosystems. We regenerate ecosystems by cultivating seaweed and creating habitats and encouraging biodiversity and mitigating climate, ocean acidity with seaweed, but there are all sorts of different approaches to doing this that some of those other materials I listed before are able to do. I talked about it a little bit before, but I really see this great opportunity as we switch to this bio-based economy to providing more dignified employment opportunities that don't subject workers to toxic fumes in an oil refinery. It just seems like very obvious that we should be doing this. And I especially love that seaweed provides this opportunity to provide alternatives to overfishing. It's a climate resilient job. I see that's something that really excites me about this. It's maybe less obvious. And then I think that, environmental solutions really need to be designed for everyone. So we're designing our material to fit into existing converter networks so that, a company as large as Marsh could adopt it and allow the average person to participate in conscious consumption. I think the biggest overlying theme here is our goal is really to bring brands into the future beyond this idea of sustainability and into this wave of regenerative thinking where, we're able to meet carbon reduction goals and construct regenerative uplifting value chains rather than just continuing the way that things always have been. And in this way, I really hope that we can lead the benevolent materials revolution, create social and environmental impact at every step of the supply chain. We're hoping that Sway can serve as a successful case study in regenerative design. And ultimately, that is how we hope to sway the future. So that's my talk. That's some footage from my hometown, Carmel. If anyone's curious, I highly recommend visiting the West Coast. It's a great place to be. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Julia. That was such a beautiful and inspiring presentation. So we're going to open it up to the Q&A now. So if you can hear me and you're able to turn on your video, please do. And feel free to shout out your questions to Julia.
Yes, I have a quick question. I was wondering, since you are already seeing this being an option to replace bags, maybe this is a bit far-fetched, but do you see it an option as becoming furniture?
It's a really interesting idea. So the ideology that I generally have around compostable or biodegradable materials is that we should focus on materials that are likely to be disposed of quickly. And otherwise, we should build materials that are prepared to be infinitely used to keep materials in use for as long as possible. So if we were able to adapt our material to be so endurant that it could be put into a furniture item and it would last for decades, then absolutely, yes. But otherwise, I like to focus on the materials that can't be recycled or can't be transitioned into a reusable replacement. Like, people ask us why we don't look at water bottles or straws. And I think it's the reality that there are so many great alternatives already that people realistically could adopt. I'd prefer to focus on things like poly bags where only 1% to 3% of them are ever recycled. And even when they do arrive at the recycling facility, they end up being rejected and just returned to landfill. But that's I think, the more bio-based materials we have in the works, the better.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Hi, Julia. Karan here. I'm a second year. Thank you so much for showing all this. This is really inspiring. And I mean, it's just bursting to see like what all applications we can see with this. I'm really curious about like what's the scalability in terms of manufacturing about these benevolent materials, because like usually that's where the supply chain kind of gets blocked and I mean is forced to look at alternatives.
Yeah, no, that's the biggest barrier to Sway succeeding and basically any biomaterial succeeding. So the way that we're addressing that is, one, we're trying to focus on a really localized supply chain for at least the time being so that we're able to shorten lead times and work with sort of the domestic partners that are based here in the United States. So if we can at least tackle like as many plastic converters based here in the United States to start, lay the groundwork for scaling outwards into other regions. And our goal is to produce basically a resin, a pellet that can fit right into existing extrusion machines, so that this can be, shipped and distributed and produced in any country in the world. We get a lot of questions around the scalability of seaweed itself. And so far what we've seen is that we're not quite at a place where we're going to run out of seaweed, but we might in the future. So we have this sort of cohort of marine biologists and aquaculturists who are really preparing for this wave of bioplastics, biofuels, and other sort of new seaweed-based products to make sure that we can scale sustainably and not sort of run into unexpected externalities that are going to negatively impact ecosystems or otherwise. But no, it's a good question. We're concerned about it as well.
Thank you.
The material that you are currently working with is so unbelievably clear, which I know is a huge concern in the industry. Does it have lots of oxygen barrier potential, properties, or is that one of the challenges with food packaging?
So let me show you. I should have done this earlier. Actually, I have a sample with me right now. You can see how strong it is, which we're really thrilled about. We actually have a variety of compositions of this material at the USDA based in Berkeley right now. So we're actually getting all those mechanical properties and moisture barrier tested at the moment. And we'll have those results in 2 weeks. We're hoping that we're going to get to work with the USDA because they have a lab, a pilot scale lab, which would allow us to really test how this material is going to work in traditional manufacturing lines. But no, oxygen barrier is not a concern, at least within the applications that we're starting with. The retail bag, the poly bag, not a concern. When we get to food packaging, it really, really will be. So we're giving ourselves a few years to reach that point, but we have some promising natural additives that we're looking at that are probably going to really enhance those barrier properties. I mean, there's a reason it hasn't been done before. So I won't pretend to suggest we've got it figured out, but we have a path forward.
Amazing. Thank you.
Don't be shy. You can ask me something entirely unrelated, like feedback on your thesis if you want.
In terms of comparing seaweed properties to plastic, like, not that I like plastic, but it holds such beautiful color. I don't know if you mentioned that in the talk, but what's its ability to, retain color pigments? Not that, again, maybe that's not a good option, but curious.
No, but it's a super valid point, because if plastic is going to succeed, or sorry, if seaweed's going to succeed, it has to be substantially better than the existing option. So yeah, it's able to retain color really nicely, actually. It is a printable material, although we've yet to run it through traditional printing equipment, but it does hold, in all the tests that we've done so far, it holds color quite nicely. We believe that we'll be able to reach any sort of level of opacity needed. And even like integrating, as I mentioned before, possibly some, okay, I have an example here. Have you guys seen agave straws in the market yet? They look like this. And they have like a little bit of agave fiber still in them. And I think that's actually a benefit, because then the user immediately knows, oh, this is not traditional plastic. So we're looking at how we can use some of those residual seaweed fibers to give some indicator. If a brand partner wanted that feature, we could integrate it. And perhaps there's even performance benefits to doing that kind of thing.
And you said it's you're able to print on it, I assume, but have they also done 3D printing tests with seaweed?
So I've seen, yes, we have not done it, but there are algae-based resins that can be used for 3D printing. I think there's a company or an organization based in Denmark or Holland that's working with like a microalgae that can be 3D printed, as well as some sort of yeah, mossy sort of river algae. I forget the name. Lume? I'm not sure.
Interesting. Thank you.
So hard to wait the students out.
I have a question.
Yes.
Hi, Julia.
Hi.
So I actually was at your thesis presentation, and
Aw.
yeah, and I actually brought it up to Alan. I'm sure he doesn't remember on my interview for POD. So I'm really happy to be
That's so
talking to you.
nice.
And why do you think you got accepted?
Yeah, so great presentation then. Great presentation today. I guess I'm interested in being like a business owner and what types of fears that you have with that. Because I think it's such a like enviable thing to start your own business, but I think every business owner is like, it's so much harder than you would ever imagine. So I'd love to hear about like different fears that you have.
I'm really glad that you asked that, because I think like I'm very surprised, to be quite honest, to hear you say something like, oh, I really liked your talk. I have imposter syndrome, I think 100% of the time, or maybe like 98% of the time. So that's even more amplified when I'm operating in the role of CEO of a new company in a sort of risky field. And we're fundraising right now. So I'm going in front of angels and investors on a regular basis, pitching to them that I have confidence, that I understand financial structures, and that I have, you know, this great vision for where the company is going. But the reality is that's not my background and it's not my training. So I'm constantly having to learn skills that I never thought I would need. I always thought that I would end up being some, you know, creative director or art director at a design studio. But I think if you're fortunate to be running a business that you passionately believe in and feel like an existential connection to, then it becomes a lot easier, because in those moments of doubt, you say, well, it's all going to be worth it if I succeed. And if I fail, you know, maybe some people were inspired along the way, kind of thing. I would also highly recommend, if you're considering starting a business of your own, of having a really strong team and maybe introducing a co-founder. I'm very lucky that my co-founder is my boyfriend of you know, over 5 years. So we've been together for quite a long while, and our personalities complement each other well, where I tend to be a bit dreamy and optimistic. He tends to be, you know, a little more grounded and reality. But it's a good thing, because when we share victories are even bigger. And when we have a loss, we're able to sort of comfort each other in a meaningful way. So that's really helped. And then you get those moments of validation, like what just happened with Beyond the Bag, where we got that feedback, you know, from Target and CVS and Walmart, that they thought we really were doing the right work. So maybe subjecting yourself or making yourself vulnerable regularly is a good thing, because then you have these moments of even greater validation. I don't know if that answered your question, but
yeah, it did. Thank you.
I'll shoot with another question. I'm just curious. I know that you mentioned that this is specifically what you're looking into. Again, I don't know much about this, but something that sparked my curiosity is that at the University of Iceland, they're doing underwater diving, and they have people kind of researching the microbes found in the ocean. As an alternative for antibiotics. So I know that this is like a very long shot pitch. Maybe it's not even applicable to seaweed, but I figured this was the space to ask this, if you're even considering that.
I think either I or you cut out a little bit there at the end. It was probably me. I'm not super familiar with underwater microbes, but I do know that some seaweeds have been tied to um, like combating COVID. There was an article that came out that seaweed had some sort of property that could that was resistant to COVID. So there are like a number of really interesting health properties associated with seaweeds, but that's not really my department.
Thanks.
You said something that kind of startled me when you had said what happens if we succeed. I was giving a talk at the 2009 Compost Modern. It was like the first sustainability conference. It was actually in San Francisco in California. And Joel McCower, who was like the lead, like the keynote, had talked about, he says, the thing is around sustainability, and that was really the only word that was used in those days. There wasn't talk around restorative or regenerative or resilience. And he said, the thing is, as designers, like we need to give the world a vision of what happens like if we get it right. And the whole room just like went silent. And it was the first time, it was like one of those stake in the heart moments for me, for sure. It was just like, that was just this key sentence of like, we have Hollywood and all of, so many fiction writers, nonfiction writers talking about everything, going wrong, about every disaster, that we as designers actually visualize what it looks like when things go wrong. But we don't have a lot of designers who are actually like showing us an image, a video, in some sense, a brand and a mission of what happens when we get it right. And so I really just appreciate and love the fact that you had literally said that at the end. What happens if we succeed? Yeah, I just think that that's pretty wonderful.
Yeah, that resonates. I think especially during that initial research around the effects of plastic, I got exhausted quite quickly with just how doom and gloom the future seemed. And what I think motivated me much more was this opportunity to bring this sort of new future to life and make it more visible for more people. I think oftentimes when the future is conveyed, it's one of two extremes. It's either apocalypse or it's like, I don't know, stacks of very shiny
Utopian,
white buildings. Yeah, right. And that's not an accessible future necessarily, although I think we should, look far into the future. But what would, 10 years from now look like if we succeeded? And how possible is it for the average person to partake in the solution? I think that so much of the climate movement is exclusive. And I think we as designers have this great ability to make it available to everybody, especially in this age of misinformation, especially as, teens are totally saturated with, the reality of the climate crisis and are reading the news every day and believing that their future is going to be some sort of desolate reality. And we can show them that that's just not the case. So no, I think that's something I've really enjoyed about Sway. It manifests on our Instagram the most, but just giving people reasons to feel hopeful, motivated people motivate other people, kind of thing.
Yeah, it's super joyful. I was going to ask a question about brand, but maybe I can ask a leading question for our second year students who are attending. So the idea of steering your thesis about a future, or listening to your thesis that helps you like pick the future, and just the guts to go and do it. Can you talk about the transition a little bit? Because we do have several thesis students whose project and whose area of inquiry really wants to continue. But of course, the pressures to get a job, student loans, all of that is just overwhelming. For those who might be able to swing it financially to continue the work, do you have any advice on some of the you know, I don't know, almost mindsets that could help them out in actually making an affirmative decision in that way.
Yeah, I think being kind to yourself and acknowledging that you can pursue your passion, but also, you know, reasonably. What I did is I was working part-time as a designer and still supporting myself that way, and still do with freelance work. I think designers are really lucky to have work that's, you know, can be flexible and can be short term. So yeah, if you're in this position where you think, I really want to build this project, it's my dream, but I also am in an enormous amount of student debt now. You can have those side projects that sustain you while also really starting to dive in deeper into the work that you built during your thesis. And that's what I did. And at times I felt that I thought that it meant that I didn't have a sense of direction, but that's what I mean. You have to be forgiving of yourself and say, you know, I'm a very young person. There's plenty of life to live. Like if you really, yeah, I don't think this is a very good answer, but like we're really lucky as designers to be able to work at any time generally. And so, and then, you know, you transition into that phase of pursuing your passion when you're ready. And it will become obvious. What helped it become obvious for me was, you know, getting evacuated from Peru and needing to adjust to a new normal. But I hope for you it's something else, less extreme. Yeah, I don't know. Was that a good answer? Do people have feelings about this? Is it fear? I don't know.
Got to jump in.
I have some thoughts on that as a graduate as well. I think that the whole experience that you guys are going through right now, it's really special. And what I would recommend is to not get caught up to like piggyback on the whole idea of like the world is this doom, and truth is destruction sells and construction costs. You know, it's hard to fucking make it, and there's shit out there. Yeah, no doubt. But don't let that be something in your way, you know. And like myself, I'm still building the platform that I left on my thesis. But just take the time to like really think, what impact do you want to put out there, and what can you build with it, you know, whatever the fuck it is. Like, go at it. And me and Julia has like, we have like a really big respect, because it will always be like 3 a.m. and we'd be the only ones in there. And I was like, wow, you know, like you're really taking this time, like, and I think the way you should, like, go at it. And, you know, being like what, a year and a half, 2 years out, I can certainly say there'll be no other time like it. And enjoy and really jump on it as hard as you can. Use all of the resources that you can, because you have. And don't be afraid. If you're afraid, you're going the right way. Basically, I think that's a good way of looking at it. So go do some amazing things. The world needs it, you know?
Yeah. I like so the thing about fear is like being afraid is not equivalent to something being dangerous. Just because you're afraid of something doesn't mean that it's dangerous. That's been a comforting sort of guiding thought. And then you touched on it as well, Pedro. It was something that Alan actually said in second year, which is that, you know, do you want to create work of consequence? And that has been a total guiding message in everything I do. It's like, yeah, I want to create work of consequence, and I'll do whatever I need to get to that point. Yeah.
And Alan brought that one time in class, and I hope he brought it with you guys.
Oh shit.
about, I don't know if this class is all in New York, but there's the value of the social currency, which is the actual currency in New York. Use everyone in a good way, of course, but understand the value of the connections you make. And because these are the things that are going to take you forward, professionally, or the thing you're trying to build too. So take that into consideration, through this time. Like, build as much connections as you can right now, because you're a student and you're building things, and you get a lot of respect for that.
You got the golden ticket. I missed the golden ticket.
It's nice.
Amazing advice. I think we definitely have time for a couple of more questions. I also want to say, legitimately, because I'm from California, I'm loving the great advice and the chill California vibes I'm feeling in this meeting.
I'll tell you a tiny anecdote, which is that we had an intern from DC last semester, and she was so confused by how everyone on my team talks. I was like, why is everyone so nice to each other? Why are we sharing our feelings? It's so radically different.
I miss it. So it's a breath of air. It's nice.
No other questions? Can I call on people?
Sure.
I have a mini question. My question is, like, what do you see as like the biggest challenge in making like plastic alternatives, like this, like sway in like mainstream, I guess, like, and also like what is the timeline for that?
It's like Karan was saying earlier, it's only scale. That is the only barrier, basically. And I think there are so many bioplastic companies that have failed because they weren't able to plug into existing machinery, or they decided to, headquarter in the United States, but produce exclusively at a factory across seas, and they lost control of their supply chain, or the material ended up being deficient in once it was produced at scale, and it became super brittle or not aesthetically pleasant. So I think, yeah, scale is the only thing. And my hope is that by going big and only focusing on major retailers and brands, we'll be able to scale more quickly because we'll have evidence of demand. So what we're currently doing is talking to every apparel, cosmetic brand that we really admire and feel akin to in terms of mission, getting an understanding of their packaging needs, what their challenges are, what they've tried, what hasn't worked, what would resonate with their community, and then essentially guiding our pitch and our further conversations to them around getting some sort of letter of intent that says, when Sway is ready to launch, we'll commit, to 100 units per month. And that looks really attractive to investors. So it's kind of like this puzzle piece of gathering interest at a high scale so that we can scale. But material development is so tricky. It's like a chicken before the egg situation at all times.
Is the pellet like the holy grail? Is that like the ultimate win?
Yes. Plastic is traditionally produced, either it's like cast or it's blown, and blown films are the most popular ways of producing something like this. So if we can get it into a pellet form and put it through traditional blown film extrusion lines, that will be, success. And it gives us the opportunity to not just market finished packaging, but also sell resin, which presumably would, expand our reach and greaten our impact.
I do have a question.
Hi, Beric. I was looking at you. You're the one I was going to call on.
I guess I sensed it. I missed the whole presentation. I joined and then
Nice.
I at your website.
That's his MO. He's like,
so I think I got the idea, and I love your creative direction. I love your creative work. And my question is, how is it different to design to do the creative direction for clients versus for your own company?
Oh, yeah, really, really hard. I think we've all had that experience of putting together our portfolio website and iterating and iterating and iterating, and it'll never be good kind of thing. But that's about how it was building Sway, and still is. I'm very happy with the color palette, but the logo is not even remotely what I want it to be. And that's kind of okay. It's more about the business. I have to accept that. I'm always being corralled by my team to focus on the actual content and not just what it looks like. It does mean that putting together pitch decks takes like 5 times longer than it would take a normal person. So that's not sustainable. But I do love having the opportunity to shift what people expect a bioplastic company to look like. It makes people take notice that it's, you know, a bit more feminine and a bit more colorful and imaginative than you would typically see at a company like Domtar or Print Pack. And I think in a way it signals we're young and we're pretty nimble and open-minded and perhaps a little more in tune with what your new customers are going to be looking for. So in a way it has helped us. And I see eventually us being able to model after what Tetra Pak has done, where, you know, there's a Sway stamp on every packaging item, and you're able to connect that to a brand which you recognize and know that it's good for the planet.
My first impression was that it kind of reminded me of Neri Oxman's merging art and science and engineering and design.
Such a good compliment.
Yeah, but I look at the website, all the animation, the video work, it's so intriguing. And I wanna be a part of this world. It's so creative.
Thank you.
And I was wondering more in detail, because when you have clients, you have conversations with clients and deadlines. Do you put yourself deadlines? Does it help to have teammates or co-founder?
Yeah. I hold myself to the timeline of my teammates. I have like a comms team, what we call it brand and mission. And I have to keep them happy because they're on tight schedules. Currently, everyone besides myself and Matt is part-time. So they have other work and other commitments in their life. And that's what makes it possible for them to join Sway pre-funding. It's like purely passion, basically. I mean, we do pay them, but not what they deserve yet. So I really try to be extremely respectful of their time. And that is how we manage to launch things. Like we're planning currently this online journal called Currents, which is going to focus on regeneration, material innovation, ocean health. And the only reason that has come into existence is because my team keeps like pinging me on Slack, asking me to follow through on tasks. So yes. Super different from client work. Absolutely no guidance or anyone overhead saying this is how things should be. So that kind of freedom can be disarming sometimes, but I think you learn to get used to it.
It's so nice to hear you not liking your logo yet. That shows that you're not a perfectionist, but you know, maybe you are, but you're moving forward without, you know, getting stuck with the, you know, should I change the logo before launching my business?
Yeah, progress, not perfection. There were many even uglier logos before this one. So
Thanks for sharing.
Yeah, thank you for the questions. Most outrageous VC pitch story? Oh, okay. A couple weeks ago. So we're currently fundraising. We just started 2 weeks ago. And a couple weeks ago, I pitched to this gentleman from a very prestigious band of like a group of angels. And he was outside in Los Angeles, outside of a shoe shop, while his wife was getting an IUD, which he shared with me. So she's like seeing a doctor and he's outside of a shoe shop and there's a ton of noise. And I pitched him while he didn't turn his camera off or his sound off. So it was just very distracting. And by the end of it, when I could finally see his face again, he was like, I don't know, not paying attention. He was like drinking a beverage out of like a plastic container, which seemed especially insensitive. And I was asking all these questions about like what it was made from that I don't know. I understand that fundraising is difficult and not everyone's going to love your project, but that felt especially, yeah.
Can I ask you to please keep a diary of these? Because it would be a great anonymous book to publish, like my first 2 years looking for money, looking for funding.
I'll keep track.
Only the people here will know who the writer was, and we're obviously sworn to secrecy tonight.
Okay. Yeah, I'll only share it with these viewers.
Well, I mean, the fact that you're doing it, that when we see it at
gotcha.
We'll know who the anonymous writer is.
I will be honest though, the people in impact investing and the climate tech space, generally, they get it. And they are, I mean, it's only been a couple weeks, but it's been going well so far. If I can say that humbly, it's been going well. So I feel super fortunate to be in a space where people understand that this is not, a business for business's sake. It's in existence because we think that we can make, real positive change for planet and people. So far it's okay.
I dare you to send a circling back email to Mr. IUD Shoe Sidewalk. He'll probably fund you.
I won't. No. Never. Have we exhausted all questions?
We got some good questions. We got some good answers. That was lovely. Well, thank you so much, Julia. That was amazing. And thanks everyone for your questions. Of course, we can put you in touch with Julia, I think.
Yes.
If you have any follow-ups or thank yous.
I love talking to students. It's my favorite thing. I can share all the really bad feedback that I got on my thesis and all the naysayers. I'm happy to share that, and all the yaysayers too. But I love talking about thesis. So if you want to reach out or anything, I don't know, design world.
Perfect.
Yeah.
It's good timing. It's coming up.
Yeah. Julia@swaythefuture.com.
Great. Well, thank you so much, everyone. And we'll see you next time. Have a good night.
Thanks so much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.